Hi, and welcome to Rave Leader Chat number 17 for the book of Acts, coinciding with Acts chapter 17. Another fantastic chapter as Paul continues his second missionary journey. As he continues to go on, we remember that last week he made it to Philippi, and things were going great there. And then things begin to wrap up a little bit, and they decide to move on from them. They remember they got released from prison, were apologized to, and then it was time to begin to move to the next place. And so Paul and Silas, and at this point also Luke, and move on, and Timothy move on to Thessalonica. And so what you're seeing is that Paul's going to continue to move through these Greek provinces and hit their capitals. The capitals are familiar to us because they are all books in the New Testament or letters in the New Testament. He's going to go to Thessalonica. Eventually, he's going to go to Corinth and Ephesus. All these sort of province seats, if you will, the major city there. And so that's what we have here in our first stop. It's about 100 miles that he went. And again, I just want to remind us that as Paul keeps moving, we read it verse to verse very quickly, but there's actually some significant time in there. And so he gets there and passes the other two cities, gets to Thessalonica. And what does he do? He does what he normally does. He goes to the synagogue and begins to teach and preach. And if we notice here, he gets there and he goes 3 successive Sundays. And I really want to commend first just the opening question about, as he goes, starting to assess sort of the cultural landscape. And I think a great question for us to always ask and answer is, what's sort of the default theology? What's the ethos of the environment that we're going to be in? Because you're going to see Paul use that in a couple different places, in a couple different ways in this passage. And sort of knowing the landscape and knowing the mindsets and the presuppositions that you're dealing with really helps us sort of shape our gospel presentation so that people can understand it. And so Paul, he knows where he is in Thessalonica, and in question one is a very good question as well, but I want to call it 1+. What does Paul do with the scriptures? How does Paul really try to make this appeal? And we get a fantastic explanation of that in verses 2 and 3. And as he does that, as he persuades and teaches and reasons and explains and proves that Christ had to suffer, and again, this is to Jews, he's trying basically to convince them that the Messiah, the long-expected Messiah, and Jesus are the same person. And so that dying on the cross really was a challenge for a lot of people's expectation. So that's what he's trying to do there. And we notice that, like many places, he has some success. There are some Jews, but impressively, there's also some Greeks, more Gentiles that are coming. And as we've talked about before, the gospel unites different people, but the truth of the gospel also makes a significant claim on your worldview, and so it oftentimes separates. So by verse 5, the Jewish leaders, and that's probably the best translation there, the leaders of the Jewish people are very upset with what's being taught. There's this accusation that they're turning everything upside down. That was a very serious threat. So really, Paul and Silas are being charged with treason. And unlike other places where they kind of hung in there and waited for arrest, this time it seems the pressure was so great that the group kind of hides them. And it had negative implication on Jason, who they were staying with. So they come and they arrest and sort of charge Jason. And then at the end, it seems like Jason pays bail, but it also, if we read 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, talks about this reason that they can't come back. And we infer from this that Jason had to cut a deal with the authorities to say, hey, I'll pay this much money, I'll get out, but here's the contractual deal. I can't host them again. And so that could be what Paul's referring to there. Again, it's an inference, but it's probably a pretty good one. So they escape by night traveling, and they go to Berea, where they have a completely different experience. I want to recommend questions 3 and 4. Really good questions about sort of the difference. How does Berea react? But also what does it mean? And I think this is an important one. This idea of not only a willingness to examine the scriptures, but a willing to search it to make sure everything's true. Why are many Christian bookstores called Berea, or why is Berea Christian Bookstore one of the big leading competitors in the market? This is the passage because the people in Berea really approach the word. Now, if you think about this with Thessalonica, what did Paul do with the word? How did the people in Berea receive the word? Very, very different experiences, and just interesting how both the proclaimer and the receiver have some choice and responsibility in what to do with God's word. So they receive the word with eagerness, they examine the scriptures, but then some of the upset Jewish leaders from Thessalonica come down to Berea and begin to cause agitation as well. And so Paul at this point decides to depart to Athens, and he ends up asking Timothy and Silas to stay for a little while and then to follow eventually, which they do. So Paul sails across the sea. I believe it's around 300-mile journey. So he makes it now to basically in this passage, he's going to make it to southern Greece and then northern Greece. So he makes it to Athens, and Athens we know was this proud city. It really was sort of the center of culture and thought and philosophy and art. And so it's a significant place to be. And when Paul gets there, he is by himself. And notice what he notices. Notice what his first reaction is. He doesn't notice the fine architecture. He doesn't go on a sightseeing journey. He doesn't say, since I'm here before them, I'm just going to kind of go. He is overwhelmed with the presence of idols. And it really is that same word from the Old Testament, especially the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that idolatry provokes God to have a visceral reaction, a jealous reaction. And so Paul looks at this and he's just saddened to the point of disappointment that all these idols are there. One of the notes I came across from somebody who sort of studied Athens in this period said that there was a bigger collection of idols to Greek gods in Athens than anywhere else. One author actually sort of jokingly said it was easier to find a god than it was to find a man in Athens. So they're not just stone; they're covered in gold and very prominent all over the place. It sounds like the whole of the Greek god pantheon is there on display. And so Paul really sort of walks around and he begins to proclaim the truth. And it's interesting that there's two branches of philosophy or philosophers that are present that we're also aware of historically that have some curiosity. And in some ways they mock him, but in some ways they're intrigued. And so they invite him to come to the Areopagus. And the Areopagus really is what it really literally means is the Hill of Ares, or if you Romanize it, Mars Hill. And again, that's why Mars Hill sometimes gets batted around in Christian parlance. It's a place for people to come and to discuss the philosophical aspect of Christianity, to make an appeal among the cultures of the world. And so Paul gets invited to come here, and again, part of it is maybe to mock him, and part of it is to find out more. And Paul gets to basically invited by sort of this group. It's not really it's more of a civil board that sort of tends religious, moral, and educational matters, but they bring him in to hear. So he's getting to speak in front of, and this public place in front of some important people. Sort of think city council or the can't think of the right word for it right now, but Chamber of Commerce. You've got these important leaders from the community that are there, and the crowd might be there as well. And then Paul makes an appeal, and it's an appeal that we hear about a lot. He appeals. Notice what he doesn't. He doesn't come out and condemn them. He says, you know what? I've noticed that there's all these gods around here, but I've noticed one that you've got that is somebody you do not know. But I proclaim to you who he is. You are open. He finds us opening. You are open to understanding that there is a God out there that you're unaware of. And let me tell you about this God. So I want to commend questions 7 and 11 in this section. This entire section of questions and this entire passage is fantastic. But I want to sort of invite you to look at what are the 5 points that Paul makes? What are the 5 aspects of who this God is that he points to? And so it's that God is the creator and sustainer. God is the ruler and the father and the judge. And notice how he kind of puts all these different aspects of God together to say, and here's why you need to do it. And one of the most important little sections of this is, God was patient when you did not know, but now is the time for you to know. And I think that's an important thing. That's a great reminder for us in heart. When we go out, we want to go out to those who are far off from God, and we want to bring them near, and we want to be grace-filled. We don't know what they're aware of. We don't know how much they know. But we also need to remind them, there was a time when you did not know, but now you can know fully. And so Paul makes that appeal. And it's a wonderful, wonderful appeal that he makes. He quotes a couple of their poets. Notice he uses sort of things outside of the Bible that point to biblical truth. He's not using these poets as canon per se. He's just saying, hey, you guys are well aware of this. This is the God in whom we live and move or have our being. You are aware of this sort of idea. He's taking things from their cultural understanding that are true about God and saying, hey, you already sort of subscribe this. You know this. Here's the appeal. And so the last question in the study guide really is a good one to say, how can we make a similar appeal? How can we think creatively about presenting the gospel with touch points that people already have to make God's word known? Fantastic passage. Continued blessings on your group. Thank you so much for your continued leadership. We are more than 2/3 of the way through. I do want to give you a heads up that beginning sometime in November, either the first or second week in November, the sermons will not be on the book of Acts. We are going to do an intentional preparation toward moving into our new space. But I will continue the Rave leader chats, and they'll probably be just a little bit, they'll be about the same depth so that you're better prepared for that without your group having that sermon. So if I want you to just be aware of that and know that that's coming up probably the first or second week in November. Take care and God bless.